Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. We're excited. This might have been one of the fastest turnarounds from a recommendation of a person we just heard from, Jade Autry, to a person we now have a 6 Degrees of Associations referral, Mike Moss. Mike Moss, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the call so quickly and getting scheduled so quickly. I think we have a really exciting topic today. Lucas, hailing from Orlando and an association conference himself. So Lucas, thanks for joining us from the road.
Yeah, my pleasure. Back in person, so it feels good.
Yeah.
I apologize ahead of time for the noise because it is a convention and they aren't quiet. So
I think everyone's just going to be jealous if they hear it. They'll just be jealous that they're at home. So, Mike, you currently serve as the president of the Society for College and University Planning. And when you and I got to connect for about 15 minutes, and then we just had a little bit of a conversation up here, I think we have a really exciting topic today and one that we haven't really covered in detail for a lot of our folks. So I can't wait to dive in, but planning, that's in your title of your association. Why don't you maybe kick us off with a little bit of what your association does and maybe give us a better definition of strategic planning?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so the SCUP, as we go by, we were founded 57-ish years ago, largely around physical campus planning. And from there, we've, of course, evolved into really a supporter of the integrated planning discipline. What we mean by that is that you are going to have a strategic plan. Everyone has a strategic plan. You want to have an active strategic plan. And our advocacy comes around that integrated planning discipline, which allows you to connect horizontally across your institution all the time, not just in cycles of whether or not you are reviewing a plan or renewing a plan, but you're actually in cycle of planning constantly. So ultimately, Aaron, what we advocate for is a culture of planning using the integrated planning discipline as your guide.
Yeah. And if there was ever an industry right now that is in the throes of need of strategy, I mean, it's so exciting when Jade let us know what industry we're in, we're like, colleges and universities, my goodness, if everyone knows the pandemic has completely upended that. So I'm just curious, what maybe have you seen over the last year that's been accelerated that perhaps your industry was already looking at, and how you've been trying to help some of the colleges and university plan through that hysteria, if you will, because it really felt like it for a good 18 months there.
Oh, no, the hysteria was real. And it was not born from a lack of planning, but maybe from a lack of active engagement with one's plan. And so everybody got caught off a little guard, whether it was the associations or the higher ed institutions themselves, and we had to go virtual. And so there was always a trend of moving into hybrid courses. There's always been online learning for decades. It's not new, but the prevalence of how deep we had to go was certainly new, and at the speed we had to do it. So what we learned is there were institutions who were better prepared than others. But in all cases, everyone got through. It got better as we went. And it really opened up the conversations about, hey, we got all these other long-term trends. What's going to happen with those now? Yeah. Right. So as we start looking at wellness initiatives, and we start looking at other ways that we connect students to success, and we also look at the pressures now from outside the front door of the institution and what the for-profits are doing now in the same time to react to their employment and training needs, and how quickly they've been able to accelerate certification and certificate programs. What does that mean for the future of higher ed? And so I think what's been really exciting, and I'm really grateful for the job I have, is we are in the middle of some of the most critical conversations at a speed that is new for us as an industry that is actually welcoming, it is inclusive, and it's scary, and it's awesome. And I think what we're actually overusing now, and I'm absolutely somebody who does this, we finally are at that moment of transformation. But with the integrated planning discipline to help us really focus, we are actually at a point of perception change with all these other underlying trends, including climate change and its impact. And now we also need to look at how we transition. What does that change management look like? And therefore, what are our strategies as we could put that foresight forward? One of the things we may have advocated as visionaries is that we could look out 10, 15 years, and some of that is true. Most of that has now been truncated down to, let's get into a more reasonable cycle of planning. So I think one of the other accelerants out of this, Aaron, is that maybe we're more open now to not having time-based plans. Every 3 to 5 year cycle, we're actual and perpetual planning with reactive moments and responsive moments that allow us to be more agile to student success and ultimately to service of the mission of the institution.
So how often now, when you're making recommendations and educating, members and institutions, how often are you suggesting that they look at that? And I mean, is it annual? Is it every quarter? What's the cadence?
That's a great question. And some of that just goes back to the planning culture of the institution, because it all starts there, is that we advocate not that you do a plan, but that you have a planning culture. That way, when there is turnover, presidents may come and go on 3- and 5-year cycles, provost, same thing, that the planning is durable beyond just the person who wrote it or advocated for it or otherwise supported it. And so in that cadence that you ask about, certainly annually at a minimum, you need to know where your performance metrics were against the goals that you had. But you certainly also should be sequencing your goals, that they don't all end in 3 years and then they all end in 5 years. You have goals with dependencies, no different than if we just took this down to project management. There are massively awesome goal dependencies. So put those out there and show that in the next 2 years, as we do this, it allows us to do that in 4 years. And there's your perpetual piece. As you complete the second, it informs what comes next, which arguably might be 5 and 6 years out. So we do, at a minimum, you got to touch it annually, at least at the macro level of your university. But that doesn't mean you're having to retrench, restart, but you should be also doing constant conversation. So the relationship piece of integrated planning is where it's the easiest thing to understand and the hardest thing to do. Is I have to maintain relationships across the academy, not just within my department, not just within my team, maybe not just with my donors, but that relationship connectivity is where you find the trends before they become a trend.
Yeah, it used to be you'd write your 3 to 5 year plan. You know, that would be the one that you'd write on the wall, and maybe annually you'd huddle up and figure out if you're on track. And now we've entered the era of the dashboard, the active and live dashboard. And so, you know, things are coming in by the minute. And it's not only a culture that exists at the management level. On some level, the younger generation or the employees of each institution have come to know and get accustomed to that as well. So what are some of those things that in your industry that have changed with regard to, you know, metrics and sort of a daily feedback mechanism rather than, you know, the annual huddle or strategic planning?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. And I guess one of the things that we would say kind of in an unofficial mantra is know thy data and know thyself, because all good data isn't good data any more than all good ideas are good ideas. Because the ability to collect has maybe exceeded our ability to interpret towards need. And so we want to make sure that you know your data and you know your mission, you know your goals, you know your outcomes, and those strategic outcomes are informed by all those outputs. And we've gotten some amazing support from the ed tech industry to be able to understand student success better. So God bless the entire planet, because I was an average student best, and I now get to come into higher ed as an average student with an opportunity to help with the transformation. And it's exceptional that can actually happen. And the reason it can happen is because of what they're able to do now, which is when I got a C in that first course with pretty good predictability now, they can tell me what I should take and shouldn't take. And when I go to the counseling session, based on all the analytics of all those who came before me and are in the similar tracking. So it's not necessarily robotic to tell students where to go, but they have better information as to what they want to do with sets of data to help make those decisions in concert with the institution. So I think the student body's better informed, the faculty's better informed, the administration's better informed, and strategically we can drive to those outcomes that are mission aligned, as opposed to just the outputs of, and they're not unimportant, but a graduation rate is an output, right? Yeah. I can count that, it's a point in time. The strategic outcome of my graduation rates means what? And that's what we're trying to really, that's that foresight piece that you want to keep in perpetual motion, is those outcomes that strategically you're driving towards are set by those, as you referenced, the data outputs that we can get probably more than we can even understand at the moment. But that's also, the ed tech industry is crushing that as well. There's a lot better reporting that allows me to make a change again before the trend's a trend.
Yeah, there's an opportunity that you pointed out there that's really become a challenge, I think, for organizations and associations, and that is we're now collecting so much information and you're learning so much that you have to sort of pick and choose which of those data sets that you want to act on, because you can't fix everything. And so you have to find out where your focus is, and that's become the challenge, and lining that up with your mission. How you all maybe have looked at that, because again, there's a lot of data coming in from the institutions. How did you all select which ones you actually want to run forward with?
I think that goes back to the relationship side, because while I may see a certain output as like, it's material to someone for a reason that I need to understand. And so maintaining those relationships and stakeholder conversations on your campus not just department heads, figuring out a way that you have relationships that inform up and sideways helps actually with that decision matrix. So knowing what to decide, when to make those decisions is, that's very complicated, because we don't want to fall back to the simple, because it's very complex, but making the complex simple is where we're trying to get, right? So if I can get 1,000 data points, but I only need 5 to make the decision, the relationships I've established, I know which ones are the most important to those stakeholders. I think I'm a better informed planner.
Yeah. You know what I think is interesting that you're saying here is that we were talking a little bit about some of the, before we came on air, so to speak, about competency versus comprehensive education. And a lot of us, our associations that we work with, they have their own certification programs that are specific to the industries that they work within. And that would speak a little bit more to competency. But as I'm hearing you talk about strategic planning, I would argue that maybe one of the things that we do miss a lot is that people do get siloed, and therefore that integrated planning isn't maybe happening as much because people are in their silo of what they understand and their competency, and maybe aren't. How are you helping sort of to bridge that gap, knowing that you're at the crux of the education center, that can help people learn those skills, but also in this unique position of helping people to understand integrated planning better? It's such an interesting purview that you have.
No, it's amazing. Again, I'm just spoiled to heck to be here. This is an amazing association at an amazing time, right? So what I think one of the ways that we would address that question, Aaron, is this is where the proverbial partnerships come in, is that there's 46-ish, there's probably more than that, associations that just support the administrative side of higher ed, not the discipline-specific faculty-based. There's tons of those, but there's at least 46 of us, if not more, supporting the administrative side.
Goodness.
And so we're kind of that nexus point, as you point out, because everybody around us is doing very important things and very specific reasons for very specific pieces of the campus. So how do we then choose out of those acronyms which partnerships help build those relationships in a durable way and then go to the next? So our strategic need here at SCUP is to better understand our colleagues, where we can intersect on those relationship builds. And it's not just teaching them integrated planning, it's us understanding why in the budgeting cycle they're so protective of X, Y, and Z. Or why in the allocation of resources, you're not willing to do A, B, and C.
Right.
And getting a much richer understanding of auxiliary services, student affairs, business officers, just keep rolling. That's where I think SCUP's greatest opportunity is. And that does not mean that we need their members to be our members, but our communities need to overlap under the intention of strategic execution. I think that's the relationship challenge for SCUP.
I think there's a real opportunity for other national associations to hear that sort of thinking and be okay with there being a fractional outpouring of their mission, so that there is a national organization that can, as you said, bring those things together and be the focal point, but be okay with having smaller organizations or divisions that are more focused. I recently was listening to a mastermind speaker was talking about, what happens when you take a river that's 100 feet wide and you make the banks 10 feet wide? Well, what happens is the velocity of the river goes faster and you can accomplish more. And so that's the idea of, instead of having a 100-foot wide river, why not have 10 that are 10 feet wide and can all move things along a little bit faster? So I like that.
That's a great analogy. I like that. No, I will give you attribution on that my next time I tell that story.
I'm going to have to give somebody else that as well. I'm just passing it on. So.
Yeah. Who was that speaker? Before we close out, I have at least one last question, and then I know we want to be respectful of time here. So I want to say that when we were talking before we got on the show today, Mike, when just you and I were talking, that you had mentioned something around an innovation hub. And I think this was something that you're opening up within SCUP so that you can see more innovation moving and happening. Am I right on that? And can you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we felt was really important in April of 2020, when at that point, we all had the realization that this wasn't going to be a 30-day thing. This is going to be significant. Mm-hmm. We made a very important decision at the board level, which was strategic acceleration, not retrenchment. And so we had things set in mind for years 4 and 5 of our strategic process, and we were in year 2 that we said, yep, we're jumping to year 4. So one of those things was, how do we bring innovation into planning in a way that does what we just accomplished with the overlapping circles and the acceleration and all those things? So we created what we've started off, we call it the garage. And it's basically a virtual setup of, when we're doing the innovation work, we're not connected to the headquarters activities of SCUP. We're not disrupting programming. We're not in the way. And I know that that sounds dismissive to innovation, but what we wanted to be really mindful of is that we were going to go do some things that probably were a little off mission at first. And if they were, let's just keep it in the garage. So let's go tinker where it's safe. And then when those ideas happen that make sense, support mission, support plan, we'll chuck it over to headquarters and let them run with it. So the first couple of things we did were product-based, things that we had imagined and thought about, and we were able to bring champions, not committees. Super important. That was the first we don't have any committees. We just have champions who can come in, help us ideate, do the, the whole divergence, convergence process, and come up with some things that serve better, throw those over to headquarters and let the experts run it. So we've done a couple of those. Now where we are is we're actually looking at a couple entity creations that would involve other organizations, both for and nonprofit, and members and non-members working together to solve some of these more complicated, long-standing trends through the lens of planning and whatever they, that's the overlapping circle piece.
Well, first, kudos to you guys, Mike, for jumping out in April of 2020 with something focused on innovation and recognizing that there's a need for acceleration within your strategic plan. That it's in your name, so I'd expect it. But, kudos to you guys for executing on that. And then two, I love the concept of the garage and that you're open to, sort of these other umbrellas that continue to specialize and supporting those so that it still drives mission. It doesn't necessarily have to be under the same roof. And because that can sometimes muddy the waters and create internal competitions or channel conflicts of sort. So I really appreciate the concepts there.
Well, I appreciate that. And one of the things that I got to give, I have an amazing group of teammates. And so I tend to be the black marker on the whiteboard. And then I'll come in and there's purple and orange and somebody in blue because it's open ideation. And so they have open access to any office here with any writing to be able to provide their perspective because they are experts in their space. I am not. And I really appreciate their willingness to do that. So that's actually something we've learned internally with our own culture. It was always there, but we didn't give them the vehicle to do that innovation and that creative thinking. So we're pretty happy with that. That's been at least a positive cultural response so far at the organization.
Excellent.
I love that. Yeah. We might have to do a part 2 to this because I feel like there's so many more words of wisdom that you could give us, and so many associations that could absolutely learn from this discussion around strategic planning. But as usual, I am the party pooper who comes in and sweeps us out because we got to be respectful of time, both yours and our audiences. So Mike, we have come to the end of the show. Again, I think we would love to have another conversation with you. If nothing else, people can check out our blog next week, where I'll try to pull a thread here with a few of these topics. But before we leave, we of course want to know if you have anyone in mind that you think our audience could also benefit from hearing from in the future.
Yes, and I'm going to caveat it with, I'm a big believer in, and it's a dumb term, but I can't find better words for it. And I've heard other people use it, which is reverse mentoring. The normal mentoring, right, would be me as a gray hair with a junior level employee. The person I'm about to mention is probably in the first 20% of her career, and I'm in the last 10% of my career, and I learn every time we interact. And her name is Ariana Riak. She's the CEO of Matchbox Virtual Media in Canada. And it is a virtual company, but what she excels at and where I learned from her in every point of contact we have is she is one of the best connectors I've ever met in my life. And she knows how to multimedia the connection. So she can use what we're doing here. She can do it on the phone, can certainly do it face to face, but I would encourage a conversation there about her superpower is connectivity.
Awesome. I love it.
Certainly.
It's the whole thing about our show.
Yeah.
Perfect for 6 degrees of association. So I love it. Well, Mike, you have been an absolute pleasure. Again, I think we could really keep listening to you and learning so much. We might have to call you from Advanza once we get our strategic planning underway, or the next iteration of it for sure. But thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you to Jay Daughtry for recommending you. He was highly complimentary of you, and he turned out to be absolutely right. So thank you so much. What a joy.
Yeah, rightly so. Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind comments and the support. And I really had a great time. Thank you.